It's about time I built another character from Darksiders and build the second protagonist, and I would say the name of this particular Horseman of the Apocalypse, but I think there's a bit of a red flag on YouTube if I say that particular word, but you know what I'm talking about. So we need to cover a few different things between his necromancy, his martial ability, and his ability to fight pretty well on horseback. So it's going to be a bit of a weird mix, but I think we can pull it off. Let's start with the species, and just like we did with War, we're going to be building an Aasimar. They get celestial resistance, so they have resistance to necrotic and radiant damage, which is great for dealing with angels and possibly random undead creatures. They get the feature Healing Hands, so they have a number of D4s equal to their proficiency bonus, and they can use that for a bunch of healing. And then they have Celestial Revelation. We needed some way to pull off a transformation pretty quickly, and this is a great way to do that. It only requires a bonus action and it lasts for a minute. You can only do it once per long rest, but once on each of your turns you can deal an extra amount of damage equal to your proficiency bonus, and it can be either necrotic or radiant, and considering the theme of this build, we're going to go with necrotic. Then you can actually transform in a few different ways. You can have heavenly wings to get a flying speed. You can activate inner radiance instead, which sheds a bright light around you, and then everything within 10 feet of you is going to take some damage, which is some radiant damage equal to your proficiency bonus. Or there's the last option, which is probably the most fitting considering the character, and it's called Necrotic Shroud. Your eyes become deep pools of darkness. You get some flightless wings that sprout from your back, and you have the chance to frighten every creature around you. Then when it comes to the background, I wanted to stick with the 2024 backgrounds, and the best fitting one is probably going to be Guard. It actually fits our ability scores very perfectly because I am going to be focusing on a weird mixture of strength, intelligence, and wisdom. Becoming a Guard gives us skill proficiencies in perception and athletics, but it also gives us the feat Alert, and this feat allows you to add your proficiency bonus to your initiative rolls. You can also swap your initiative with an ally, but you usually ride solo, so not sure how much that one's going to help. Then with your ability scores, we're going to have a point spread that looks like this. It is a bit of an interesting point spread, but it will make sense later. So we are doing a 3-way multiclass with this build. There's going to be a couple different types of spellcasting we're going to be doing, so I'm going to go through each major class, cover the spells at the end of that class, and then do the multi-class, so that way it's a little bit easier to break this up. But there is a special way to take your levels in order for this to be the most viable build while you're playing. So I will cover that at the end of this build, just so that way there's a bit of clarification. But we're actually going to be starting with a cleric. And when you become a cleric, you get to choose 2 skill proficiencies. And because of the overall themes of this build, we're going to go ahead and grab Insight and Religion. Then clerics usually only get light or medium armor and shields, as well as just simple weapons. But Death does use a lot of big boy weapons, and especially a scythe. But that's okay, because right at first level of being a cleric, we get a divine order. Choosing your divine order allows you to align yourself with either being more of a spellcaster or more of a martial type of character. You can be a thaumaturge, which is all about spellcasting, or a protector. And we're going to go with protector because you do wear a lot of different armor, even if you are just bearing your chest most of the time. In the game, you can swap out armor as you please. So being a protector gives us proficiency with heavy armor, and it allows us to use martial weapons. And a scythe, as far as gameplay ability, would probably be something similar to a glaive, so I think that's pretty fitting. You also get some spellcasting at first level of cleric, but we'll cover that at the end of our cleric stuff. At second level of cleric, you get Channel Divinity. You can use this twice, regaining 1 use on a short rest or all of your uses on a long rest. And you do gain more uses of it as you level up in cleric. Right now, you have 2 options to use it for. Divine Spark, which is a new addition in 2024, allowing you to use a magic action to deal some damage or do some healing, dealing 1d8 plus your wisdom modifier at this second level of cleric, or it jumps up to 2d8 at 7th level, but we don't have to worry about anything beyond that because we're going to be doing some multiclassing. The other option you can use for channel divinity is turn undead. This forces a bunch of undead around you to make a wisdom saving throw or be frightened and incapacitated, which was a bit of an addition in this version. And those conditions last for 1 minute, which is a lot of time in battle. And for that duration, those undead run away from you as much as they can. You do get additional options at 3rd level though, because at 3rd level you get to choose a subclass. And when we're choosing a subclass, it's kind of obvious we're going to choose the death domain. I think we're far enough into this YouTube video that I don't have to worry about saying that word anymore. You used to automatically gain bonus proficiency in martial weapons when you chose this subclass, but you don't have to worry about that anymore because of the updates for 2024. But you do get a whole bunch of spells automatically added to your spell list that is automatically prepared, most of them themed around necrotic stuff. And more importantly, you get the feature Reaper. So you can learn 1 necromancy cantrip from any spell list. And when you cast any necromancy cantrip, you get to target an additional creature within 5 feet of the original target. So when you're using something like Toll the Dead, which is one of the highest damaging cantrips in the game, as long as you don't boost up Eldritch Blast from being a warlock or something, it is super powerful because at level 1, that is 2d12 that you're dealing with a cantrip. But you can get Toll the Dead just from being a cleric. So let's also grab Chill Touch, because if you're going up against some creatures that have any self-healing, this is going to be very helpful. Chill Touch deals 1d10 necrotic damage at its base level, and when a creature is hit by this, they can't regain hit points until the end of your next turn. Also at 3rd level of being a Death Domain Cleric, you now get your Channel Divinity. This is called Touch of Death. So when your Cleric makes a melee attack, you can deal a bunch of extra damage. That damage equals 5 plus 2 times your cleric level. You can only do this once per turn, but that is still a huge chunk of extra damage to be dealing. And if you mix that with being an Aasimar in the first place, it's actually extra powerful. Then at 4th level of cleric, you get an ability score improvement. So let's go ahead and boost up our strength because we're going to focus a little more on the martial stuff to start. Then at 5th level of cleric, you get the feature Seer Undead. So when you use your Turn Undead Channel Divinity feature, you can now damage the undead at the same time. So any undead that fails this saving throw against Turn Undead, they take a bunch of damage equal to a number of d8s equal to your wisdom modifier. So that sounds more complicated than it actually is. Just take your wisdom modifier and roll that many d8s, and that's the damage you deal. At level 6 of being a Death Domain Cleric, you get Inescapable Destruction. So now any necrotic damage that you deal from your cleric spells or from your Channel Divinity feature, it ignores all resistances to necrotic damage. At 7th level of Cleric, you get Blessed Strikes, which gives you 2 different options. You can either use Potent Spellcasting, allowing you to add your Wisdom modifier to any cleric cantrip's damage, but we're actually going to choose the more martial option because it actually is slightly more effective if we're stacking everything together. So we're going to take Divine Strikes. This allows us to add 1d8 of damage, either necrotic or radiant, to any damage we're dealing with a martial weapon once per turn. It's not a ton, but considering we can ignore resistances to necrotic damage and we can boost up the overall damage with our Channel Divinity, and we can use Channel Divinities more often in the 2024 version, this is going to be pretty darn helpful. Then at 8th level of Cleric, we get another ability score improvement, so let's go ahead and boost up our strength by 2 more points. And that's the most amount of the levels we're going to take in Cleric. We're going to do a multi-class, but I want to cover all the cleric spells first so we can cover all the cleric stuff in one big chunk. When it comes to cantrips, there's only 2 to really worry about. Toll the Dead, because it's another necrotic dealing spell, and it is just generally pretty massive damage, dealing a d12 of damage, as long as the creature has already been damaged at some point. Then we're going to stick with a bit of a theme, but we're going to make sure we're also optimizing a little bit. So we'll get False Life for an extra shield of health to help us out, Shield of Faith for a bit more of shield to yourself, giving you an extra +2 to your armor class. Then we want Spiritual Weapon to have a weapon that we can swirl around with whatever thoughts we want, and it's just another scythe to spin if you want to. But this did get a bit of a nerf in 2024, requiring concentration now. Then, of course, we need to be able to dive into the Necromancer side of the skill tree that Death has with Animate Dead, which you get by default thanks to being a Death Cleric. Have an entire aura of damage around you with Spirit Guardians, because I just love this spell for clerics. And you can deal Radiant or Necrotic damage with this, so we're going to be dealing Necrotic. Then you want to be able to get a bunch of life when you destroy a creature, so make sure to utilize Vampiric Touch. You want Blight to just make someone wither away. Death Ward for an extra life, because it basically makes you unkillable once. And then if you really want to activate a massive transformation to make yourself unreasonably powerful, grab Anti-Life Shell. It prevents any creature other than constructs and undead, and frankly most of the undead are going to be on your side anyways, from getting within 10 feet of you. So if you want to just blast a bunch of spells while you're in there, you can do that and still have your undead army helping you out. Then the last one I would grab is Cloud Kill, because it's a pretty solid AoE spell. Now it's time for that multi-class. So we're going to make sure that we boost up our necromancy side of the skill tree and jump over to Wizard. Now Wizard is going to be a little tricky because it's all about spellcasting, but we do not have a lot of intelligence to boost up our Wizard spellcasting abilities. So we're going to utilize the features of being a wizard, but focus on spells that don't require a lot of our intelligence. We only put that 13 in intelligence just to make sure we can do this multi-class in the first place, because that is a prerequisite. Becoming a wizard gives you Ritual Adept, allowing you to cast ritual spells without expending a spell slot, and you don't even have to have those spells prepared, they just have to be in your spell book, which is going to be important when we cover the wizard spells at the end of this section. You also get Arcane Recovery to allow you to regain some spell slots on a short rest when you really need it. You have the ability Scholar, allowing you to get expertise in a particular skill, and if you want to swap your wisdom for intelligence on that skill, you can do that. So we're going to choose Religion. Then at 3rd level of Wizard, we get to choose a Wizard subclass. So we're obviously going to choose the School of Necromancy. This gives you Necromancy Savant, making it easier for you to copy necromancy spells into your spell book, but more importantly, it gives us Grim Harvest, which allows you to reap life energy from creatures that you destroy. So once per turn, when you cast a spell of 1st level or higher, and specifically it does not say that it is required to be a wizard spell, so this will apply to all of your cleric spells as well. Killing a creature with one of these spells allows you to regain hit points equal to twice the spell's level. But if the spell happens to fall into the School of Necromancy, you get 3 times the spell level instead. Then at 4th level of Wizard, we get an ability score improvement, and we gotta boost up our wisdom modifier, because that is what we're going to use for most of our spellcasting, and it really helps all of our cleric stuff. Then at 5th level of Wizard, you get Memorize Spell, which we're getting into 5th level of Wizard because it gives us access to 3rd level wizard spells, which is what we really wanted. But this just happens to have an additional benefit of Memorize Spell. So on a short rest, you can swap out any number of spells from your spell book as long as it's an actual leveled spell. So that way, if you realize that the spells you have prepared aren't exactly as useful as you would like, you have this option. But now we're at 5th level of Wizard. That is all I wanted to grab. So we're going to go ahead and dive through the spells that are going to be the most useful. We're going to grab a couple cantrips that are mostly just able to boost us up without requiring our intelligence modifier, like Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade, because these do not require any spell modifiers. You can just attack with a melee weapon. We can still have things like False Life here instead of in our cleric spell list, so that way it's something that we can spend our spell slots on, but we can also grab Magic Missile, which will always hit a creature, or Shield to help benefit our defenses, or Silvery Barbs, which just automatically inflicts disadvantage while granting advantage to somebody else. And then of course we need Find Familiar, so you have your Raven flying around helping you out. When it comes to a couple more defensive options, we want Blur to give everybody disadvantage on melee attacks against us, and Mirror Image to help make us a little harder to hit, which is also useful because there is the whole thing in Darksiders 2 where you're able to make a double of yourself, kind of. So mirror image is going to help with that. But there's 3 spells at the 3rd level of Wizard that are going to be super helpful. The first one is to amp up some sort of transformation and boost up your damage and your speed and everything with the spell Haste. It gives you 1 additional attack to use on your turn, which is great to have, but it also boosts up your armor class by +2, it doubles your movement speed, and it gives you advantage on dexterity saving throws. The other one we want is Spirit Shroud. This generally just boosts up our damage for any melee attacks that we're dealing. But then the last spell we have to make sure we grab, because you're literally a horseman of the apocalypse, is the spell Phantom Steed. That is the entire reason we got to level 5 of Wizard. It literally allows you to summon a horse-like creature for you to ride. Now, we do miss out on one important feature of being a necromancer, which is allowing us to boost up our undead, which is a little unfortunate, but we're more focused on the martial side, so we just didn't put quite as many points into the necromancer skill tree. But I want to make sure we boost up what he uses a bit more often, which is his martial abilities, and we're going to multi-class into being a fighter. And becoming a fighter gives us a fighting style right at 1st level. So we're going to grab Great Weapon Fighting, because that is going to help with swinging a massive scythe. So now the amount of damage you deal with your weapon is at a minimum of 3, so you never have to worry about rolling a 1 or a 2 anymore, as long as the weapon has the 2-handed or versatile property, and you're holding it with 2 hands. Also at 1st level of being a fighter, you get Second Wind, allowing you to regain some hit points equal to 1d10 plus your fighter level as a bonus action. And then the last thing you get at 1st level of fighter is a weapon mastery. You get to choose 3 weapon masteries right away. Grab basically anything scythe-like here, like a halberd or a glaive. In general, those are just massive weapons that feel semi-scythe-like. Halberds give the feature Cleave, allowing you to hit more than one creature with a swipe of your scythe, or if you want to swap that out for a glaive, you get Graze, allowing you to deal some damage even when you miss a creature. Then at 2nd level fighter, you get Action Surge, allowing you to use 2 actions in a single turn, but this does have a limited amount of uses. At 2nd level, you also get Tactical Mind, allowing you to add a 1d10 to any ability check that you need to, but this would use up one of the charges of Second Wind. Then at 3rd level of fighter, you get a fighter subclass. And we're all about riding our horse, so we want to choose Cavalier, which gives us the feature Born to Saddle. So you have advantage on saving throws when it comes to being knocked off of your horse. Mounting and dismounting your horse only requires 5 feet of movement, and falling off your horse allows you to land on your feet now. Also, when you take this subclass, you get Unwavering Mark. So you can mark a creature, and if that creature is within 5 feet of you, it has disadvantage on any attacks against anyone other than you. This is mostly to protect your undead summons. And if a creature that is marked by you happens to still attack somebody other than you, you then get an extra attack on your next turn as a bonus action against that creature, and that will do extra damage. You have advantage on the attack, and the extra damage equals half of your fighter level. Then at 4th level fighter, you get an ability score improvement, so we're going to go ahead and boost up your wisdom by 2 more points. At 5th level fighter, you get extra attack, which is very necessary considering we're so focused on martial stuff. And at 5th level, you get Tactical Shift. So when you activate your bonus action to use your Second Wind feature, you can now move half of your movement speed without provoking an opportunity attack. Then at 6th level fighter, you get another ability score improvement, which is very convenient because it's 20th level overall, and this means that you get to use an epic boon. So we're going to go ahead and choose the Boon of Combat Prowess. This is just generally nice to have, and especially if you really want to deal a boatload of damage with the Channel Divinity and whatever buffs you want to add on top of that, because it makes it so you have to be able to hit with an attack once per turn, and it can be utilized for anything that requires an attack roll. So if you're doing a cantrip that requires an attack roll, you can still use this. And then we get to boost up 1 ability score by 1 point, so let's go ahead and round out your intelligence by 1, because There's nothing else that's going to benefit from one more point somewhere. Editing RJ here. Obviously, I was very wrong about that. I totally miscalculated while I was recording, and in actuality, we should put that into wisdom because that makes it so we have maxed out wisdom. That brings us to the end of the build, but there is a special way that you want to take these levels to make it most utilized. Personally, if you want to make this actually semi-optimized, I would take 1 level in Cleric to stick with the theme, then 5 levels in Fighter so that we can get that extra attack really early, making sure the 4th level of Fighter is actually a strength boost because that's what we're going to focus on early on. Then jump back over to Cleric, finish up your Cleric stuff, jump over to Wizard, finish up your Wizard stuff, and then take your last level overall and put it into Fighter so that we can get that epic boon to top you off. It's a bit of a weird way to jump around, but I think that's probably the best way to utilize this while still being able to utilize this guide overall. Let me know what you think about this build in the comments down below, and if you want a character sheet for this build or any of my other builds, feel free to check out my Patreon, linked in the description down below. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, let me know by hitting that like button, and I'll be here helping you roll at least 3 nat 20s in your next D&D session, especially if you want to be the Darksider, Horseman of the Apocalypse, Death in D&D.